to Jorge. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, I have around half a dozen slides to share. But first of all, I'd like to begin by telling you why I'm here, or why I think that I'm here. I'm here to share an academic scientific study that we already published 4 years ago. And this is in a high-impact, academic journal. And when I go to the meetings at the Ebro River Basin Authority, nobody ever mentions this study that we did. And I'm not making any complaints here, but there is an issue here. There's an issue of communication. The Ebro River Basin Authority should have some representative here as well, because I think, we're here to talk about the Ebro River. It's not the River Basin Authority of another river. So when we talk about these are online. These are things that have ended up in these academic journals of high impact, but I don't think that impact has reached us here. And we're talking here about the Ebro River. A lot of money has been spent, and this work that was submitted was done by a team of half a dozen researchers, Spanish and French researchers, who over a year and a half were studying nitrate pollution in the Ebro River. And we tried to design a system that would allow not just nature scientists to understand what was happening, but also so that economists and politicians as well could understand what was happening. We wanted to make a connection in turn between the more harder sciences and their political application in the everyday. This is what I want to convey to you today, more than the technicalities or specific points, which I do also have, and I have these prepared in an initial version of this presentation. I don't think that makes much sense. What I'm going to be talking about are the implications. I only have half a dozen slides to share. The title says basically everything that I'm going to be talking about. We have a problem, and that is nitrate pollution. We have a river, the Ebro River, and its tributaries, the river basin, as I mentioned here, which is contributing to that problem, that huge problem that we also haven't got under control, 100% under control in terms of data, in terms of future implications. This huge issue is reduced, minimized, and this is something which is happening silently, without anyone finding out about it, without it coming out in the news. This is what the news is doing. This is what the river is doing. It's doing so silently, and nobody really gives value to that. But we want to design a way in which to assess this. So when we go to present this, where there are many social scientists, the only kind of valuation that people understand is one that is an economic one in terms of money. Otherwise people are saying, yes, it's a problem, it's all words, it's a serious problem, we ought to act. But because we've been listening to this for 25 years now, perhaps now it's time to do things differently so that action is taken. And so, although Alfredo already mentioned this matter, the world still talks in dollars. It's the only language that the world understands. It's the only variable that you can get a reaction to, for better or for worse, but it does do something. If you don't speak to it in dollars, then the system says, oh, how nice. That's all it does. Communications, press releases, meetings, huge, long, beautiful sentences, but in the day-to-day, the delta, Ebro Delta downstream, You're not going to reach the heart of the system with words. You're going to have to reach the heart of the system in dollars. And so that's where we talk here about economists. And we have faced a lot of criticism by ecologists, logically, because they'll say, how can you reduce all of this to dollars? There's so many feelings involved in this. And I say, well, okay, but if we don't do that, then, the opposite is going to happen. Somebody has to do the dirty work. And here you have me to do that. So, this is the system. This mentions basically everything. There is an idea, which we have heard so many times. I've heard it thousands of times. I don't even know who to quote for this first line. The quantity of water available depends on its quality. Quality and quantity are evidently related. And this is very important. In semi-arid areas such as our own, although these days people tend to forget that we're in a semi-arid area because we've seen rain recently, but in semi-arid areas this is even more serious. The solutions that RIN can adapt are completely different to those that we can find in the Ebro. This isn't the Mississippi, it's the Ebro, and that's the situation that we have. The first form of quantification isn't one that we have completed, and I will present that shortly, is how to measure this effect. And from more of an environmental, economic perspective, the first way to try to do this was through grey water, which was mentioned earlier on. Grey water is a way of measuring that connection between quality and quantity, and it's said that it's the quantity of water compromised as a result of pollution. That's the idea. And this gives us certain figures, certain numbers. We have something to hold on to. That's grey water. But we wanted to go to the next step here, which is our contribution. So how can we make sure that this grey water that everyone has data on, and it's important, and it's worth fighting for a reduction in this, because in the end it's the level of pollution, but instead of measuring it in terms of tons of nitrates, this would be in terms of water compromised by those nitrates, which is basically a kind of complicated translation of what is done in practice, because it's easier said than done. So what we do is to assess this economically, and what we have is a possibility. And it's, why don't we do the following? Let's imagine that what the river is doing is something that we had to do ourselves with treatment plants. This would have its own costs. These high costs which are avoided, this is one of the techniques, and we have others, but this is one of the techniques that has been used to assess these environmental science services. We didn't invent this, obviously. We didn't invent grey water or the costs of services avoided. Obviously, how much does one thing cost? Well, as a minimum, whatever it would cost us to do. I think that any judge of a court would say that it's reasonable, legally, to compensate nature with the cost that is avoided. I mean, it sounds quite good. It doesn't sound bad. This is the cost avoided. We're obviously not talking here about quantum physics. We're talking here about simpler matters. But so when we come down to the real situation here, we're talking about 8 people in a team who have been working over a year and a half. And of course, you have to do specific things. And that's what we did. This is a diagram prepared by an economist of the river basin. This is the main river, the Ebro. Then we have the north tributary, the Gallego, the Cinca, and other ones. And then we have the south tributary, which would be a mix of all of those in the south that have less water for whatever reason the reason may be, because we have the Iberian system down here, we have the Pyrenees in the north. So these rivers contain a lot of information, but we only are searching for two data: the flow of the river and C, the concentration of nitrates. With these two data, which fortunately today, well in this case in 2019, 2020 we had, and we didn't have that available to us in 2009, so this is a huge leap forward in terms of the availability of data. And then the second leap was that in 2009 we didn't have the IT capability to process that data either. This is a period in which the data at the Ebro River Basin Authority were only the daily flow data. And they said, here you go. And I said, what am I going to do with this? Why do I want this? To warm up. Those, that paperwork they sent on didn't serve for anything for me. Although I would have been able to add them to the computer wouldn't have been able to process them in 1990. They wouldn't have been able to do that in 2000 either, but today they can. And today, at the Ebro River Basin Authority, you don't have to go to ask for the paperwork. They have a device which has come out in the media, and often, and it tells you the different river flows and different data, so you can process that. And you have computers that can process that data. So that's the difference between 2009 and now. So even if we had 200 people here, that's the difference. The main work here was done by two people in terms of the data collection and data processing. And of course, in our disclaimer, each individual has put down which work they did. So, grey water, which Hoekstra presented at the time in 2011, is a very simple concept. It just has three basic ideas. How many pollutants there are in terms of tons. Concentration per flow is X weight. If this were water, this would be tons of salt, as we did previously, and if it's nitrates, then nitrates, whatever the case may be. So this is the natural concentration here on the right, which is to try to think, because did the river at any point not carry anything? Well, that's not really the aim here either. So what is the natural volume here if we went far back in time? And this is a delicate topic here, because the maximum concentration would be something completely anthropogenic. Humankind might say, how much do you want to contribute? And so often it's mentioned that this is something, that the ecological flow of the Jordan, Moses, and so on. No, it's something that occurred between human beings. And as there's no ecological flow, there's drought, then perhaps there's variability. But really, it's an agreement between human beings. It's not, Moses that's going to come here with the tables to tell us what the ecological flow is. So Cmax is the same. How much are we willing to withstand? Because if we want to know about the compromised amount, if we become very demanding here, then the maximum that we want to withstand here, even if we went 3,000 years into the past, we would already have this CNAT, but we already have this much. But how much can we withstand? And this here is the difference which determines the result. And this has been done, and this, we could have done this very quickly and we would have finished this study in 2 months. But we said, well, This has already been done. The only thing that we have done is apply this to the Ebro River, and that's it. Well, okay, we could have said, well, that's enough, we'll issue a few publications, and that's it. But we thought, we'll have to do something useful here, come on. So we said, well, if it also gets published, then even better. And this was the study that we did. I won't go into much detail, just as well I've got this on PDF, because usually I've got this as an animation and different things start appearing. But what I want to share here is the overall idea. When we ask what would happen if the river didn't do this, we have to simulate the river losing its flow. In 2019, this was a simulation. Within 3 or 4 years, this will be a reality. So, climate change means that the river flow is reducing, and as this happens, it starts to reveal the concentration of pollution. There is part of the concentration of nitrates which isn't due to more nitrates being added to the river, rather because the water is reducing. This isn't quantum physics, as I said earlier. And so if this is the case, last year we got off free just by a tiny amount because of the nitrates, because we had huge rainfall. We saw the period of rainfall at the end of September, but things were very bad last year. I don't know if you were aware of that, because in the news this wasn't shared. So this is what we measure, and it seems simple. It's easier said than done. You'll be able to see that it's actually very complicated to carry this out. So we calculate this mass of pollutants, of contaminants, which the river is decontaminating for us for free, and we multiply this by the costs of treating that water. This is also involving a lot of work in terms of data for treatment plants, costs behind that, locating them as well. And then we get the value at the end. And here we have, if we're looking at the concentration that we have before the revolution, which was below the maximum flow, where the water was quite good. But this is also when we already had to decontaminate, even when the river flow wasn't reducing. Obviously, if it does reduce, then we have to decontaminate more. This is the paradox. As we decontaminate, we have to take out more nitrates, but with a lower volume of water to decontaminate, because in the end, well, this is nothing new. And here we have one of the muses of the drama. And this is a presentation that I, could have offered very simply. These involve just 4 ideas, but this is different. This consists of collecting all of the data from all of these different collection points. And this isn't the same as saying it. And then also the treatment plants which are there at certain points, and also to have the costs in each of the areas. And this is the translation here. This is the jump where we can say that the red areas, which are the expected areas, this is the table of Europe that we mentioned earlier, and also in this river basin, but also because we have different kinds of agriculture going on. In the red areas, we're talking here about 33 and 42 million euros per year. And unfortunately, the Ebro River is not paying that. That's the idea, per year. This could be an underestimate. What's the most worrying part of this? What we see is what is flourishing. The measurements of the concentrations of the river is what is flourishing. But there is a procedure that my colleague will be talking about, who knows more about this. He knows more than I do. In that process, between the nitrates being shifted to another place and then coming out into the river flows. There in the midpoint, we have this black screen. There are some studies, some estimates, but these have to be done in situ because we don't know what's going to be coming up. Next year we might see even more coming because they're from 2016. So the internal flow of these underground waters, which is where nitrate has to pass through, it doesn't go through the air, of course it goes underground. We're talking here about water. And we don't know what's going to come out. So the analysis is what we've done with what we've measured, but as we've been doing the study, we were also aware that there were 8 million pigs putting nitrates into the water, and the data we were measuring were of pigs from 4, 5, 6 years ago, or even just a month ago. We didn't know, because even though we asked, nobody knew to tell us what the figure was, or any kind of sequence to be able to work temporarily on these matters. So this part of the study was left pending because we saw we were incapable of doing that. And this is what I wanted to present to you. In terms of the conclusions, everything has already been mentioned, and we'll start from the beginning. Every time that the flow circulating reduces, there is an increase in costs. If that increase in costs is transmitted indirectly, immediately to all citizens, there would quickly be people saying, why is the river flow reducing? But because that increase in costs goes via nature, well, nobody knows where nature's current account is, and nobody is paying that current account, and so it withstands these costs. But in the end, there's a point where it might reach that account, but only in the very worst of the moments. So before that happens, let's see if we can convey, pass on those costs to it, or rather pay those costs to it. We'll say, well, at the moment we won't pay that into your account, but please know that that's going to reach you. That's the idea. Because in the last instance, these are the people that will vote for the others. These are the people that we have to explain. We have to say to them, don't worry, you're going to get this invoice. You might say, no, there's no data yet. It's climate change. You have to see whether this invoice interests you or not. But be careful, because this is a bill that will reach you. And this is the reason why we're here. Because the scientists of the journal where we published this article have already told us that this is good, but we're talking here about 10 people only. With 10 votes, we can't do much. And that's everything. Nothing else. Thank you.